History is often written by the victors, but legends are forged by those who attempt the impossible. Imagine, if you will, the sheer madness of the scene. It is the spring of 1453. The night air is thick with the scent of pine and sweat. Before your eyes, the laws of nature seem to be suspended. Enormous wooden vessels, built to conquer the waves, are sailing, not on water, but on earth. They are gliding over steep hills, defying gravity, dragged by the sheer will of men who refused to accept defeat. This was not magic. It was the manifestation of a conviction so powerful it could bend reality. This is the story of Sultan Mehmed II and the night he proved that faith could indeed move mountains.
To understand the weight of this moment, we must first look at the obstacle. Constantinople, the red apple. For over 1,000 years, its triple walls had broken the spirits of armies and emperors alike. It was the immovable object of the medieval world. To the young Sultan Mehmed II, these walls were not just stone and mortar. They were a barrier between him and his destiny. The siege had dragged on for weeks. The massive cannons, though terrifying, could only do so much against fortifications that repaired themselves overnight. The city was choking, yes, but it was still breathing, sustained by its lifeline to the sea, the Golden Horn.
But what drives a man to persist when logic dictates retreat? For Mehmed, the siege was not merely a political conquest, it was a spiritual obligation. Since boyhood, the words of the Prophet Muhammad had echoed in his soul. "Verily you shall conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader will her leader be, and what a wonderful army will that army be." This hadith was the fuel for his psychological resilience. It was the anchor that held him steady when the tides of war turned against him. He didn't just want to be a sultan. He yearned to be the wonderful leader foretold centuries ago. His ambition was inextricably linked to his submission to God.
However, faith alone does not tear down walls. Strategy is required. The weak point of the city was the sea walls along the Golden Horn, but the Byzantines had secured it with a massive iron chain stretched across the harbor mouth. This chain was the guardian of the city's flank. As long as it held, the Ottoman navy was useless, locked out in the Bosphorus, unable to support the siege. The Sultan's admirals had tried to break it, tried to saw through it, tried to ram it. Nothing worked. The chain mocked them. It stood as a symbol of the limitations of brute force. By late April, the camp was rife with whispers of mutiny. The Grand Vizier, Halil Pasha, was urging the Sultan to lift the siege and accept a truce. The psychological pressure on 21-year-old Mehmed was crushing. He had promised victory, yet he faced humiliation. The naval defeats were particularly bitter. He had ridden his horse into the sea, shouting commands in frustration as he watched his fleet fail. In the solitude of his tent, surrounded by doubting advisers and an exhausted army,
Mehmed faced the ultimate test of leadership. It is in the darkest valley that the light of genius often strikes. This is where the secular historian sees only tactical shifts, but the spiritual observer sees tawakkul, absolute trust in God after exhausting all worldly means. Mehmed retreated into prayer. He understood that while the outcome rests with the divine, the effort must be superhuman. He did not wait for a miracle to fall from the sky. He sought inspiration to create one. It was in this state of heightened spiritual clarity that the impossible idea took root. If the ships cannot go through the chain, they must go around it. If the sea is blocked, they must sail over the land.
The plan was audacity personified. He would transport his fleet overland, bypassing the chain entirely. They would have to traverse the steep hills behind the Genoese colony of Galata, a distance of several miles over rough, uneven terrain. His generals were stunned into silence. Move 70 ships over a mountain in the middle of a war? It sounded like the ravings of a madman. But Mehmed's conviction was infectious. He wasn't asking if it could be done. He was commanding that it be done. His psychological state had shifted from anxiety to an intense, laser-focused determination.
The logistics were a nightmare. Thousands of soldiers were mobilized instantly. The path had to be cleared, trees felled, and the ground leveled. But the true genius lay in the mechanism. They constructed a cradle for each ship and laid down a wooden tramway. To reduce friction, the entire path was greased, not with sophisticated industrial lubricants, but with what they had: olive oil, mutton fat, and grease. Every available ounce of slippery substance was poured onto the logs. All of this had to happen with lightning speed to maintain the element of surprise.
Consider the physics involved. A light galley weighed nearly 20 tons, the larger ones much more. Without modern hydraulics or engines, the only power source was muscle, man and beast. Teams of oxen were hitched to the ships, assisted by battalions of janissaries pulling on thick hemp ropes. Pulleys and winches were anchored to trees and rocks to hoist the vessels up the steepest gradients. It was a masterpiece of medieval engineering, executed not over months, but in a matter of hours. It was a testament to what human beings can achieve when driven by an unshakable belief in their leader and their cause.
Sunday night, the 22nd of April. The operation commenced under the cloak of darkness. To the spies watching from the city walls, the distant lights on the hill must have looked like a confusing swarm of fireflies. They had no idea that a navy was climbing the slopes. Mehmed orchestrated the movement like a conductor. He knew that secrecy was paramount, but he also knew the value of distraction. While the ships groaned and creaked up the hill, his mortars bombarded the chain at the harbor mouth, drawing the enemy's attention away from the miracle unfolding behind the hills.
The physical strain was immense, but Mehmed managed the psychological morale of his troops with brilliance. He ordered the drums to beat and the trumpets to sound. The rhythm of the war music masked the creaking of timber and the grunts of exertion. It turned a grueling labor into a rhythmic march. The soldiers weren't just dragging wood, they were marching towards paradise. Each step up the hill was a step closer to the prophecy. The sheer collective effervescence of the army that night was a force of nature, fueled by the young sultan's absolute certainty of success.
Reaching the summit was only half the battle. Now came the perilous descent. Gravity, once the enemy, became a dangerous ally. The ships had to be lowered with extreme caution to prevent them from careening out of control and smashing into the shoreline below. It was a delicate dance of restraint and release. One by one, 70 ships crested the hill and began their slide down towards the waters of the Golden Horn. It was a surreal procession. Masts tangling with tree branches, keels sliding over grass, the smell of burning wood friction mixing with the salty air of the approaching sea.
When the sun rose on the morning of April 23rd, the defenders of Constantinople looked over the walls and froze in horror. Their eyes deceived them. There, in the locked harbor, behind the impenetrable chain, sat the Ottoman fleet, flags fluttering, cannons primed. It was a psychological blow more devastating than any bombardment. The Byzantines had gone to sleep secure in their naval superiority and woke up to find the enemy in their backyard. The prophecy of doom was no longer a distant threat. It was floating in their harbor. The impossible had happened.
The transport of the ships did not end the war immediately, but it broke the deadlock. It stretched the defenders thin, forcing them to move troops from the land walls to defend the harbor walls. The psychological resilience of the city cracked. Mehmed had proven that no barrier was absolute. The final siege that followed was brutal, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably. The engineering genius, born of desperation and faith, had paved the way for the final assault. The walls that had stood for a millennium were about to fall, not just to gunpowder, but to the indomitable spirit of a young man who believed in his destiny.
On May 29th, 1453, Sultan Mehmed II entered the city, earning the title Fatih, the Conqueror. The night he moved ships over mountains stands as a testament to the power of the human spirit when anchored in the divine. It teaches us that when the path is blocked and the doors are locked, faith does not just wait for a key, it builds a new road. In the annals of history, it remains a shining example of how tawakkul, trust in God, combined with relentless effort, can turn the impossible into the inevitable.